The new management system, ISO 21001, series of 2018. What and why educational organizations should adopt it. Good morning, everyone. I am Raymond Alaric M. Galos. How are you today? I hope you are doing great. I will discuss further information about ISO 21001 series of 2008. ISO is not an acronym. It is derived from the Greek word isos, which means equal. ISO stands for the International Organization for Standardization. It was founded in 1947 by delegates from 25 countries, with the main purpose to develop standards for products and services to ensure their safety, reliability, and quality. It is an independent and non-governmental international organization comprising of 162 national standard bodies, or you may visit www.iso.org. These standards are developed by technical committees consisting of experts around the world in their related fields. However, it was not until 1987 when ISO gained recognition after it published ISO 9001 for quality management that has been widely implemented today. Currently, ISO has produced over 22,000 international standards, of which ISO 9001 for quality management, ISO or IEC 17025, where IEC stands for International Electrotechnical Commission for Testing and Calibration, and ISO or IEC 27001 for Information Security Management, being the three most popular standards today or applied. Educational institutions have attempted to adopt ISO 9001 from its initial version 1987 to the subsequent versions 1994, 2000, and 2008. However, it was immediately realized that the general terminologies in ISO 9001, while they are straightforward for manufacturing companies, might lead to ambiguity in educational practices. For example, the terms customer and stakeholder are often interchangeable in the context of education. One can view the students as the customer of education, especially if they are on fee-paying basis. But one can also be perceived that the industries are the actual customers of education, since they are the ones who will employ the product of education, thus are the right person to measure the fitness of educational courses to the needs of the job market. To address this issue, ISO established a mechanism that allows actors from the same field beyond manufacturing to participate together in a workshop meeting. These people can come from anywhere and are different from the technical committee members that have to go through a national delegation. The aim of the workshop is to produce a document agreeing on a certain issues with a particular field. This document is called International Workshop Agreement or IWA, and for education it is numbered as IWA2. With IWA2, agreement in educational terminologies has been reached to reduce ambiguity. For example, the customer of education is defined as learner, so not to be confused with other stakeholders such as the industries. Other terms such as product or product design are associated with the relevant terms in education such as courses or curriculum design respectively. An IWA has a maximum lifespan of 6 years. after which it has to be converted to another ISO deliverable or withdrawn. Throughout its lifespan, IWA2 had been formulated with the versions 2003 and 2007 to accompany the interpretation of ISO 9001 series of 2000 for education. When ISO 9001 of 2008 was published, IWA2 of 2007 was actually no longer suitable for use. Although some institutions were still using it mainly as supporting document to enhance clarity in ISO implementation, IWA2 of 2007 has now been withdrawn and no newer version is available. On May 2018, ISO published ISO 21001 of 2018 as requirements for the management system of educational organizations. This standard is intended to help educational institutions work on their continuous improvement path by applying a robust standardized management system. Although there has not been a statement from ISO indicating the future of IWA2, the content of ISO 21001 that incorporates key concepts in ISO 9001 and important terms agreed in IWA2 suggests that IWA2 will be permanently discontinued and educational institutions can opt for certification in ISO 21001 of 2018 to avoid ambiguity of terminologies in ISO 9001 of 2015. However, being a new standard, it could take a while for ISO 21001 to get recognized and fully acknowledged by wider educational community. Needless to say, one of the purposes in certification is to boost the organization profile in marketing. Therefore, success stories are expected to convince the management of educational institutions to adopt a less popular standard compared to ISO 9001. ISO 9001 has evolved in a number of versions from 1987, 1994, 2000, and 2008, together with 2015. A general overview of ISO 9001 2015 can be read in number 1, whereas institution methodologies can be learned from number 2, where it outlines the stages and tools that can be used in the transition from ISO 9001 of 2008 to ISO 9001 of 2015. These are, number 1, defining relevant quality management system or QMS business processes to identify the stakeholders' needs. Number 2, using SWOT analysis or strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats analysis to analyze internal and external factors of the organizations to be used in the formulation of relevant strategies and quality objectives. And lastly, analyze risks associated to business processes as well as organization strategies with a tool such as FMEA. To what extent is certification in higher education institutions or HEI useful? This comes after a fundamental question for any HEI before making a decision to get certified. A number of studies suggest the benefits of certification beyond marketing. For example, the impacts and success factors of ISO 9001-2008 implementation in Portuguese in vocational schools are identified in item 3. The authors developed a model and validated it using case studies from 5 schools. The authors also suggested that ISO standards can be used as a means to provide strategic focus and as a foundation for planning. A similar argument is forwarded in number 4, stating that ISO 9001-2008 based QMS can set up a foundation for TQM and academic accreditation. Taking a case study in a faculty of engineering of one university in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the authors explained that the implementation of ISO 9001-2008 had prompted re-engineering of several processes to achieve better performance, where these processes and their objectives are anchored to the stakeholders' needs and expectations. Another example is in number 5, where the finding shows the degree of conformities in ISO 9001-2008 correlates with the academic staff's quality in teaching. Case study was conducted in Kenya, or one of the university or public universities in Kenya. Also, in number 6, significant achievements from ISO 9001 of 2008 in graduates' quality, documentation, and transparency. Case study was conducted in University of Nairobi, Kenya. Lastly, the benefits for individuals is a key success factor, thus must be emphasized in ISO 9001 of 2008. That is in item number 7, where the case study is conducted in a Lebanese HEI. All the studies in the table promote the benefits of ISO 9001 for HEIs. However, it can also be noted that no reference, let alone case study, has been found regarding the new standard ISO 21001 of 2018. Given this background, this paper aims to discuss the requirements of ISO 21001 of 2018 and compare them with those of ISO 9001 of 2015. Being a pioneer in this avenue, this paper therefore has a strong contribution in the QMS literature. Here are the methods for comparison. A qualitative analysis is used in this study to compare the clauses in ISO 21001-2018 with those in ISO 9001 of 2015. A qualitative analysis is used in this study to compare the clauses in ISO 21001 of 2018 with those in ISO 9001 of 2015. Number of clauses and the spawning branches, like sub clauses being the lowest, are counted to see which standard has more depth. In addition to the descriptive comparison, sentences in the requirements are closely compared to identify the introduction of these new phrases and also to qualitatively evaluate the scope of requirements. Note that in order to simplify the analysis, bullet points are not compared, although it is impossible, or it is possible, that there are bear different weight between the clauses. The results of this study are described in this section. A general overview is first discussed before clause-by-clause comparison. The general overview covers clauses 1 to 3 that set the boundaries of both standards. General overview of ISO 9001 of 2015 and ISO 21001 of 2018. A similarity in both ISO 9001 and ISO 21001 can immediately be observed in that both standards use what is called high-level structure, or HLS. HLS is an attempt for ISO to standardize its own system in creating standards to ensure consistency across different disciplines. The structure comprises the same clauses from 1 to 10, and for future ISO standards are oriented toward using this system so that they are comparable. By using HLS, all management system standards will use the same core text, but added with a contextualized text depending on what the management system is all about. In spite the similarity of in spite of the similarity, there exist differences between the standards. First, ISO 9001 is referred to as Quality Management System or QMS, whereas ISO 21001 is referred to as Education or Educational Organization Management System or EOMS. The following terms are also defined in Clause 3 of ISO 21001 that are not available in ISO 9000 series of 2015, which is the old or the reference of ISO 9001 of 2015. Learner, educator, curriculum, course, program, teaching, and lifelong learning. In addition, Annex A provides additional requirements for early childhood education or ECE. That detail learning resource for ECE, facilities for play and facilities for daycare, which are specially only for ECE. ISO 21001 of 2018 further describes the relationship among its clauses as depicted in Figure 1. Here is now the figure 1 showing the cycle or PDCA cycle or the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle in EOMS framework or of ISO 21001 of 2018. Clause-by-clause comparison between ISO 9001 2015 and ISO 21001 of 2018. In this subsection, we discuss the differences between the clauses in ISO 9001 of 2015 and ISO 21001 of 2018. We directly compare clauses 4 to 10 that reflect the actual substance of the standards. Clause 4. Context of the organization. The purpose of this clause is for an organization to have a full understanding of its stakeholders and their expectations. 3 subclauses are outlined and there are no substantive differences between the two standards except for a more specific example of interested parties are given in 21001. A more detailed description for these stakeholders is provided in Annex C as follows. We have learners, students, pupils, apprentices, beneficiaries, the government, labor market, parents and guardians. Staff, that would be employees and volunteer, and other, the educational organizations, media and society, external providers, shareholders, commercial partners, alumni. Clause 5. Leadership. In the general subclause of leadership, ISO 21001 lists more points than ISO 9001, touching issues such as strategic plan, learners requiring special needs, and social responsibility that are not common in the other non-educational organizations. The terms learners and other beneficiaries are used in exchange of customer to address the issue of who the customers are in the educational institutions. An additional sub-clause is added discussing requirements for special needs education. The policy development sub-clause is also more extensive in 2001 or 21001, with social responsibility and intellectual property being taken into account. Similarly, in organizational roles, responsibilities and authorities, These additional issues are also raised, bringing more points in this sub-sub clause. Clause 6. Planning. Clause 6 is one with the least differences. Both standards address the issues of risks and opportunities, organization, quality objectives, and the planning to achieve them, and planning of changes in QMS or EOMS. Regardless, the planning clause is a critical clause since risk management usually serves as an entrance to the whole management system. Clause 7. Support. Clause 7 on support is more elaborated in ISO 21001 than the same clause in ISO 9001. An addition of 9 sub-clauses are found in the sub-clause resources in 21001, addressing particulars such as learning engagement and satisfaction, as well as staff engagement and satisfaction. The sub-clause on facilities is also more detailed in 21001. The organization knowledge sub-clause is expanded to two sub-clauses or two sub-clauses in 21001. Although 7.1.1 or 7.1.6.1 in 21001 is bulleted version on the general terms in 9001's 7.1.6. A more significant addition is observed in the issue of learning resources that should be provided by the institution. Clause 8. Operation. Clause 7 and 8 are the two most elaborated clauses in ISO 21001 than their counterparts. Sub-clauses are observed in this clause. In the operational planning and control sub-clause, the general requirements from 9001 are grouped into one sub-clause in 21008 or 21001. Two more sub-clauses are added. First, the additional requirements for special needs education, and the second is specific operational planning and control in the design, development, and expected outcomes for learning outcomes, teaching methods, and learning environments, assessment criteria, learning assessments, improvement methods, and support services. Clause 9. Performance evaluation. In addition to the general requirements, ISO 21001 requires the organization to determine the acceptance criteria, the satisfaction of learners, other beneficiaries, and staff, or customer satisfaction, shall I say in 9001. Sub-clause is more elaborated, addressing requirements for the handling of complaints and appeals, and how these are maintained as documented information and made known to the interested parties. Lastly, Clause 10. Improvement. Both standards have identical requirements in this clause, except for the order of sub-clauses that has been rearranged. For example, 10.1, 10.2, 10.3 in ISO 9001 becomes 10.3, 10.1, and 10.2 in ISO 21001 respectively. The idea is presumably to enhance the logical importance of improvement initiatives, whereby correction needs to be acted immediately. Should non-conformities occur, followed by the continual improvement and further identification of the improvement opportunities. Here you will be able to see the comparison between ISO 9001 of 2015 and ISO 21001 of 2018. You will also see the number of sub-clauses, 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 and sub-clauses, and the change of introduction of new terminologies in the standards. As you can see, ISO 21001 of 2018 has been more described and uh, has more depth compared to ISO 9001 of 2015. Also goes for the operation, performance evaluation, and improvement. The table shows that the clauses are more indicated compared to, or more given compared to, or more classified compared to um, ISO 9001 of 2015. Conclusion and remarks for future research. This paper discusses the recently published Educational Organization Management System from ISO named ISO 21001 of 2018. The discussion revolves around the comparison between these EOMs and the more popular QMS, or also known as the ISO 9001 2015. The rationale for the need of the specific standard for educational organizations are also discussed and founded in the literature review. Using a qualitative analysis by directly comparing both standards, and the following conclusion is obtained. First, both standards use the same structure called high-level structure, comprising the same clauses from 1 to 10. This enables direct comparison between the two. Next, being distinctively tailored for education, a number of terms used in ISO 21001 are very specific. Most notably is the adoption of the words learner, customer, curriculum, and courses, and their associated attributes such as learning outcomes, assessment, grades, etc. For products, the standard also acknowledges the customers of education, unlike those in regular companies, are actively involved in those processes, thus demanding more extensive communication be established between the institution as the service provider. Third, the scope of ISO 21001 is broader and deeper than ISO 21 or ISO 9001, as can be seen from the additional sub clauses that that has been delivered or has been presented in the table. This somewhat indicates that the management of an educational institution is more complex than the management of most organizations. Lastly, special needs of education is given emphasis, as it mentioned frequently throughout the standard. As to answer if educational institutions should adopt any of these standards, either ISO 9001 2015 or the ISO 21001 of 2018, I think yes. But we have to look into the needs of the institution, for then we can now set standards that must be applied, followed, and observed for the betterment of the delivery of quality education. Being part of an ISO certified institution, where the Davao City National High School is ISO 9001 series of 2015 certified, this is not easy because we need to observe plenty of standards, so everything will flow accordingly. I think that concludes the whole topic that I have. That would be all. Thank you very much. Again, this is Mr. Raymond Alaric M. Galos. Stay safe, everyone.